So welcome, and let's dive right into our objectives today. We really want to gain a high-level understanding of an organizational-wide cultural change management program that accredits the organization as a service enterprise. And it's really a seal of excellence in volunteer engagement throughout the organization. The goal is really to not have volunteerism, something that hangs out here on a branch, but to get it in the root system of the tree, if you want to have that picture. And we want to learn from an expert at an accredited organization about the process and benefits and the experience this organization, and today Sue Schafer with the City of Fort Collins had in how the experience was for them and how they benefited going through this process. My name is Sandra Freyer. I'm here at the center, a program manager, and I oversee the Service Enterprise Initiative for the state of Arizona. And so I oversee all the programming, the training for organizations that are coming newly on board and for organizations that get reaccredited. And here at the center in general, we want to build the capacity of the social sector by enhancing the effectiveness of those who lead, manage, and support nonprofits and philanthropic organizations. And we do that by serving individuals who are currently or aspiring to lead and support nonprofits and philanthropic organizations and serve organizations as a whole. And obviously the Service Enterprise Initiative is something where we want to work with the entire organizations on building the capacity. So I hand it over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sue Schafer, and I am the volunteer program manager for the City of Fort Collins. I've been in volunteer coordination and management for about 30 years. I have spent the last 16 years with the City of Fort Collins, and I spent 10 of those years in our natural areas department. And I say that as sort of a background to where we ended up, because when I was in our natural areas department, my job was to coordinate the volunteers in our natural areas department. And across the city, every department did their own thing. We did not coordinate at all. And we actually have 30 different departments that work with volunteers. So, in 2019, I came into the role with the Human Resources Department to oversee all the city's volunteer programs and to try and get everybody working together and to see if we could all get on the same page with our volunteer programs. So I like to show this slide because this is really the end of the story right here. This is the kind of the result of our service enterprise approach. So like I said, up until 2015, all of our departments worked separately on their volunteer programs. And then in 2015, when the City of Fort Collins was pursuing the Baldrige National Quality Award, the feedback that we got from that organization is that, we have all these volunteers and we say they're part of our workforce, and yet there's no one overseeing all the things that volunteers do. So the position I'm in now was created in Human Resources to oversee all of our volunteer programs. And my predecessor started into the service enterprise process, and I came into the process about halfway through, and we'll go into what that looks like. But ultimately, because of the work we've done over the last 6 years, and really has a lot to do with the service enterprise, we were able to launch a strategic plan for volunteer engagement that had everyone on the same page. And that was the first that's ever happened in our organization. So I'm really proud of that. So just to give you an idea of scope of our program, we have close to 7,000 volunteers, somewhere between 7 and 10, depending on the year, that work with our program. We have departments that could not do the work they do without the volunteers. And we have a really well-functioning volunteer program here for a lot of reasons. And we have volunteers that stick with us. Our average volunteer tenure is 4 years. Here's sort of our analytics that our volunteers donate over 100,000 hours just last year. And that's a $3 million impact on the city. So this is what we show the community, what we show city council. This is what our volunteers are doing for the city. Okay.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Sue.
Yep.
So let's dive in a little bit deeper into what is it? What is a service enterprise? I didn't come up with a name. It's not very intuitive, but it is the name we're given. So that's what we have to work with. It is really an organization that fundamentally leverages volunteers and their skills to achieve its social mission throughout the organization. As Sue mentioned, they have many departments. So it's not, and many levels. So it's not just your board and then your direct service volunteers. There could be many levels in between, or in Sue's case, there's many different departments. So how do we really know the impact of volunteerism on our organizations, and how can we be very, very strategic about how we engage them and the community in large? The goal of the Service Enterprise Initiative is really to strengthen the capacity of the organization to do exactly that, to strategically and effectively engage volunteers to address the organizational needs and the needs of their community. And there's really a lot of research that went into this originally. It started back in 2009 when the TCC group what they call the CCAT study. It is really an assessment in different categories. And they started some research there. There's a lot more to it than I want to cover today because for the sake of time. But the nuts and bolts of it was when they questioned CEOs on volunteerism and best practices of volunteer management, the highest ranking of the categories they measured. And this is not the only thing they measured. They measured other practices and capacities in the organization as well. But in volunteer management, the highest ranking was that CEOs thought, volunteer manager may think different, but the CEOs thought that valuing the volunteers and appreciating them that ranked the highest. But it was still only 30% of the CEOs that thought that their organization did this very well. So it was obvious that there's a capacity opportunity that we can do better and that we can do a lot of work, and or the CEO needs to be more involved and better informed about what's really happening in the organization. That could, of course, also influence the number, right? So here again, it is about volunteerism from leadership down to the supervisor of the volunteer and the lead volunteers that work with your volunteers. So as they dove in, they really found that the top performers, that there were some top performers in this, and they did volunteer management well. They did also organizational performance in other areas very well. And when they looked at that, they saw that there's about 11% of the nonprofits they work with that did this well. And that's the part of the research they then started calling service enterprises. So what did they find that these organizations were doing better than others? The first key finding was that that nonprofits that deploy volunteers on an annual basis and have strong volunteer management practices outperform their peers in all organizational capacities. So it wasn't just working with volunteers; it was working with staff. It was how their leadership was working together, how they shared information, the cross-departmental work. And so as you guys were working for Collins through this change management process, did you feel that there was an improvement? Or like, for example, you said you moved into human resources. So there were some organizational changes that you made that weren't necessarily directly related to volunteerism. Is that true? Or could you speak to that for a couple examples maybe?
Yeah, so yeah, I moved into human resources not because of this, but because the city was going through the Baldrige National Quality Award process. And that's a journey as well, where you do your application, you get feedback from the reviewers. And the feedback we got was you have listed volunteers as a key component of your workforce, and yet you have no one overseeing all the volunteer programs. So they created my position in human resources so that there is one point person for all things volunteers. And so I'm really the HR liaison for all of our volunteer programs. And I do I lead initiatives like Service Enterprise, right? Where, a single person in a department that is working with all these volunteers, they may not have the time or capacity to go through something like this, but that's my role. And I'll say that up until we did Service Enterprise, I think it was very difficult for my predecessor to wrangle all the departments and get everybody to be on board with all of the changes that we were making, because up until that point, everyone got to do their own thing. They had separate recording systems, they had separate recognition processes, some had none, some had lots of resources for recognition. So really, we were all over the place. And then it was going through the Service Enterprise journey that I think really solidified us as a team, because we had created a group of, they call them change champions, that are learning this together and implementing it together. And I would say that was really what got us from sort of being scattered ants to going all in the same direction. And now we've done the recertification, and all of that led to us being able to do a strategic plan that everybody is on board with and working with.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other findings was that there appears to be a strong correlation with managing volunteers well and doing and some measure of organizational effectiveness. Specifically, we see that organizations that use any number of volunteers and manage them well exhibit stronger leadership and management behavior. Is that something you saw, that leadership got more engaged during the process in some areas that they probably weren't as involved in, or other management behaviors that might have changed?
So I would not say from the city leadership perspective, because I think that we do just have a culture of valuing volunteers. So I would say that everyone has always been very supportive of our volunteer programs. I think what is interesting is that we have coordinators in each of our departments that have started to take leadership roles in how we oversee the volunteer program. So we actually created, we called it the Volunteer Engagement Lead Team, which is now 5 plus myself, 5 of our coordinators of the larger volunteer programs at the city. They're now the decision-making body. It's not me, right? So I am building capacity and empowering them, but they're the ones that are coming together monthly to push initiatives forward. So I think what I'm saying is we've found leaders from within that are doing really incredible things and helping to bring other coordinators along.
Yeah. So I would say that's a management behavior change, as far as not doing so top down, but having a team and a more horizontal decision-making process versus vertical.
Right.
Great. Another finding was that better, not just being better led and managed as a nonprofit, but it also seems they were more adaptable, sustainable, capable to go to change, and more agile. Now, you've been a service enterprise through COVID, and that was certainly something that expected you to shift in an ever-changing environment quickly. Was it at all of benefit that you had gone through the certification and things that were put in place as accreditation and things that were put in place because of that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a really great story to tell from COVID. And that is that right as COVID was hitting Colorado, our director of emergency management called me. I can tell you that was a surprising phone call to get on a Saturday, asking if volunteers could help because they had just shut down all of our recreation facilities, which are facilities that are often used for services like, discounted meals for seniors, in particular, services for seniors. So he just called me and he said, I don't want seniors to miss out on these services. Is there anything that volunteers could do? So it's actually the same team of people that went through Service Enterprise. I called them all and I said, this is what we need to do. Here's my idea. Can you help me? And so what we did was we created an Adopt a Neighbor program. We were able to launch it in 5 business days because we all had a team established. One of those people was a change management expert. And we were able to get this up and running where volunteers, we paired volunteers with neighbors in need, and they worked with them to help get medication and groceries and things like that to people that were isolating at home early in the pandemic. And then we also, further on into the pandemic, when seniors were feeling really socially isolated, we worked with our volunteers to create another program we called Virtue Visit, which was pairing seniors with a device if they didn't have one, and then a volunteer that could teach them how to use it and connect with family and friends virtually. So that was another, it allowed us to have a team of people that could pivot very quickly and think creatively and put things into place. And it gave us that cachet, that that understanding with our leadership that we get stuff done and it's done well. And so we were able to get $20,000 of CARES Act money to purchase devices and get those in the hands of seniors.
Fantastic. Thanks. That is a great story. Thanks for sharing that. The fourth finding was that service enterprises have strong, well-developed human resource practices. Most nonprofits, and you've done it, nonprofit service enterprises or public service enterprises as well, refer to them as unpaid human capital or volunteer employees. They don't view the value of their volunteers as less than paid volunteers. They're mission critical. It's like we can't get our work done. We can't meet what we have to do without our volunteers. And that means that they use a lot of the practices that we would use in a good human resource, recruit for the work, define the work, have a job description, all those kind of things. That's something that was already pretty much in place, or is that something you guys developed stronger habits around during the process?
So I would say that we, yes and no. Some of our departments use job descriptions, some of them didn't. We had policies and procedures. So we did have sort of a base level of that structure. But it was through Service Enterprise that we really were able to grow and improve what we did. Because, when you go through the first process, you're documenting what you currently have and what your plan is for the future. And we had some real big initiatives come out of those goals so that we could revisit those when we got recertified. And one of those was our volunteer engagement framework, which is basically job architecture, but for volunteer jobs, positions. that lays out a path for being able to clearly define where each job description lives, and what training and supervision is required, and how a volunteer can grow in their position. Having a ladder is a piece of Service Enterprise, giving volunteers a way to grow and build on their skills. And I would say it's through Service Enterprise that we actually started calling our volunteers auxiliary staff, thinking of them as thinking of volunteering. It used to be you couldn't really say the words volunteering and job in the same sentence. Now we actually tout volunteering as a path to employment, because it really is a way, while you can't promise a job, obviously, it's a way to gain skills and build social capital while giving back, and then being prepared when you come into a job interview.
Great, thank you. And the fifth finding was around the economics of it all, and you touched on that with one of your slides, that the organizations that did this very well and engaged volunteers really did it at half the median budget of organizations that don't engage volunteers. Now, for many of us, engaging volunteers is like a no-brainer. It's like we mentioned it a couple of times already. We couldn't serve our community. We couldn't do the things we do. And when we say this, it is not about cutting staff and replacing staff with volunteers. That is not at all what is meant here. What is meant here is that there might be many more things where you can have a deeper impact by utilizing volunteers in a more strategic and effective way than you might be doing now. And in that way, your budget is increased. It is measuring the economic impact of the volunteer is really a powerful tool when talking to funders as well. And when you're trying to search when you need funding for a program or to support your volunteers in general. So out of all these findings was a model that was developed, and that is the model we're talking about and that we're training on when accrediting organizations as a service enterprise. Currently, we have 18 hubs, and there's over 600 organizations that have been certified across the country in using this method. And these little black dots that you see here are we in Arizona. They are the hubs, and then there's different organizations, and there's a couple of things going on around Denver, and I'm sure one of these green ones is Fort Collins around the Denver area. So let's talk a little bit about the model. It's a holistic, customized change management approach to help the organization gain a greater return on volunteer investment and better achieve your mission. That is really the goal. And so at the beginning, there's a comprehensive diagnostic, and I could jump to the next slide if you want to talk to that a little bit about how the diagnostic went for you. And I can jump to that slide, so we have it up. So it is basically based on that original tool that TCC used, and since has been expanded, there were 8 categories. We now have 12 categories that we are evaluating, and we're collecting this data in a continuous improvement cycle and continuing the research. And this is basically your baseline. This is like before any training, before any coaching, before any major meetings with your staff. There's this assessment. Where are we today? How was that for you, Sue?
You know, I wasn't in this position when we did that, but I do know that all of our staff was really open to it. We got some good information, and that gave us a baseline for where we needed to go. Yeah.
But you also took it then at a recertification, right?
Yep.
So organizations get recertified every 3 years. Plus, depends on, COVID happened, other things happened, but the goal is every 3 years, and you will retake the assessment every 3 years. And I've been recertifying organizations. It's just fantastic to see that in spite of all the things that and changes that happened, turnover and everything else, the strategies that were implemented and processes and the culture that was implemented just was maintained, and you can really see how the baseline has improved. Did you guys have the data from the baseline to compare to when you took your assessment again? You probably saw a big difference.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but yeah, we definitely saw a change.
Great. Thank you. And then you go through the volunteer engagement training. This is really, this is where the real work starts. We have 16 hours of training. We're the statewide hub for Arizona, so this training will it happens virtually to make sure we can reach all corners. Maybe in the future we'll do a hybrid model or more regional model, but right now to really service the whole state, we remain virtual. How were you part of some of the trainings too as you came on board, or that was also prior to you, and with the recertification you didn't really have to do any training, right?
Yeah, I came in with, lots of experience, but I wasn't part of the training. I know that the team that we put together, they would talk all the time about driving down in the van together down to Denver. It was all in person. It was pre-COVID, so everything was in person. And we had our Chief Human Resources Officer, our Talent Development Manager, our Volunteer Coordinator. We had, and then other staff involved. So there was a good group of people that put a lot of work into that training and building their portfolio.
Right. And then in between the trainings, you get assigned a personal coach. So there's some teamwork happening with a peer team. The volunteer training itself is in a cohort environment. So there's some cohort work that you're doing with peers where you're building your network, and where you can kind of exchange ideas and exchange practices along with the teaching and the learning that comes with the change model. But in between, you have a coach assigned that can work with you and help your organization move forward and break through some of the barriers you may experience and hurdles that you may have. And then at the heart of it, there is something we call an action plan. That you develop in all these categories and strategies that we will be talking just a little bit more about. And then there's that network of peers. And so I understand from you that network's still really strong in your community, even after COVID.
Yeah. As I was telling you earlier, I work really closely with City of Boulder, which is an hour south of us, and we all kind of grew up through Service Enterprise, so they were in our cohort, and we really rely on each other when we have things we want to build, questions we have, new things, challenges coming down. When COVID happened, I relied on City of Boulder a lot to understand what they were doing. So that's been a big support for us.
So the assessment and the kind of the first step in this journey, let's talk a little bit about that, the 12 characteristics. So there's really 3 domains, and you can see them here. It's establishing the foundation, best practices in volunteer engagement, and then impact and outcome. Those are the 3 domains, and under each of those domains, we have different characteristics. There is funding and resource allocation, technology, leadership involvement, planning. So that's more in establishing the foundation. And then your typical, what many of you are, if you're in the volunteer world, are probably most familiar with the best practices in volunteer engagement, like recruitment and cultivation, onboarding, training, supervision and support, those things. But then also the collaboration with other organizations and the communication piece. What do we measure? How do we measure? How do we communicate with our volunteers and with the community at large? How are we growing and how are we changing? How are we continuing in this changing environment? How are we staying adaptable? How are we adapting to it? And most of all, how are we tracking and evaluating? How do we know what we're doing is working in this space, and how do we continue to improve as we move forward? We mentioned the training and the coaching in the process. So this is really intended to create this culture of volunteerism, again, not just in the volunteer department or in the small group, but throughout the organization, where the board members know what the volunteers are doing, where the board members know their role as a governing board, and where they're regularly updated, where it's clear that we have a budget line for volunteerism, that we have to put the resources in, that we have to invest in volunteers in order. You have to spend money to get what you need, right? You can't, so to appreciate the volunteers, but also to make sure that they have their tools and whatever is involved in that. To build the capacity by engaging volunteers, to put additional support with staff so they can do their job better, and be maybe more strategically focused versus being an operator, because they have to help us volunteers to get some of the things done that they have to do. And then again, engage senior leadership. It really starts with leadership being involved. We ask leadership to take the assessment along with other team members. So that is really a big piece of it. Thanks for being here. Bye, all.